I've cut all the button mortises. The next step is to either cut the arches or to surface, plane, or scrape the faces of the aprons. I might go on to surfacing before I cut the arches, and the reason is if you don't have a tail vise to hold your piece like this, you can hold the piece in the tail vise, but if you don't have a tail vise, you'll want to hold it in your front vise like this. If you've got the arches cut, sometimes it's difficult to hold the arched piece in here while smoothing the surface. There's a couple ways to smooth the surfaces here. You can use a hand plane if the grain is going straight. Hand plane works great. Or you can use a scraper. We'll use both. The first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to look at the grain orientation, and it actually tells me that there's some curvature here like this to the grain. I'm going to smooth the inside face as well as the outside. Let's start by smoothing this. The goal here is to do nothing more than just smooth the surface. I'm not trying to take off a lot of material, so therefore the plane is set very, very fine. If you look closely, you can see there's some undulations in the surface texture. Those undulations are from the power planer, and I want to remove those undulations. You'll be able to hear when those undulations are gone by the sound the plane makes. Listen. You can hear a slight rippling effect as it goes along, and then it'll smooth out. I prefer a hand plane surface. It always feels smooth. But occasionally you'll run into some grain where there's a knot maybe, or some varying grain, and sometimes it's just difficult to hand plane. You'll get tear out and things of that nature. In that case, you'll want to use either a cabinet scraper or a card scraper. As I say in my sharpening video, a card scraper is about the most useless thing in the shop if it's dull. However, if it's sharp, it's about the most useful thing. So, I recommend that you go watch the video on how to sharpen a card scraper. So far as using it, there's a couple things I want to point out here. One is, if I work this in like this, it's going to want to catch right there on the edge. So you'll notice what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start at an angle and work in like this. I'll also not work all the way off the edge. I could, but the problem is that I might tear the edge slightly. So you've got to be careful of the edge. You'll notice even to the end here, I can even go across the grain like this, even coming at it like this, skewing the scraper. By skewing the scraper, it also helps increase the surface area of the scraper on the workpiece. That'll also help ride over any of those undulations and bring it down flat. Flip it over and we'll do the same thing on the other side. I could use a cabinet scraper as well. Cabinet scraper will come in like this, again skewing it, pushing it like this. I highly encourage that you watch the video on sharpening and setting up a cabinet scraper. It's got to be sharp, but it also has to be set up correctly. I've got a little bit of tension on the blade, which puts a little curve to the blade, and that enables it to be cut. I'm also putting a lot of pressure straight down on the scraper, again skewing it and then working it straight. On the return stroke, I lift up on the back and pull it back like this, keeping the front in contact. I was just planing along here, and you'll notice I have some plain tear out, partly due to the fact that it's around this knot. Oftentimes, around a knot, the grain is going in different directions, and it will tear out. In this case, the best way to tame this is to come back with either the cabinet scraper or the card scraper. I also have a knot right there. I definitely don't want to plane over that, so I also will scrape that as well. Now that all the surfaces are hand planed, I want to go ahead and cut the arches. Before I cut the arches, I want to make a pattern so that I can repeat the same arch on all 4 of the aprons. I've got a piece of pine here that's actually cut to the same width, same shoulder to shoulder measurement, and I'm just going to draw an arch on this piece of pine. First of all, we'll find the center, which we know from earlier that the shoulder to shoulder measurement is 9 3/4. There's the center at 4 7/8. 4 7/8. Then I'm going to measure up about 5/8 of an inch or so. Again, if you want a bigger arch, even maybe 3/4 of an inch, that would be perfectly fine. That gives us the center point right there. Now I've got to find a way to make an arch on there. You could simply freehand it, or you can use a metal rule. I've even used a piece of wood, a thin piece of wood, some means to draw the arch on there. The only thing is you're going to need a second set of hands to come in and help you to draw the arch. Now I can cut this arch using the same stop cut method that we used when we made the shelf. I want to check the arch now to make sure that it's symmetrical on both sides. Pretty simple and straightforward to do that. We'll just position it on the apron. Let's actually flip this over because I want to make sure again that that button mortise is to the top and the arch is down on the bottom. So we'll put this on. We'll draw the arch. And then we can flip it over. As long as it's close, then we know that's symmetrical on both sides. And that's pretty close. Now we've got a pattern that we can use for marking all of the aprons. I might use a pen just to make sure that I can see the line. And remember, the arch is at the bottom. It's too easy sometimes to accidentally cut the arch at the top. That's why you'll notice I've got the buttons facing up so that I make sure that I don't put that arch on the top. The process for cutting the arch is very much similar to what we did on the shelf. However, this is walnut, which is a little harder wood, and you might find if there's some grain change and stuff that you're going to find that you've got to follow that grain and watch it because it may want to peel out. Make your stop cuts. And then chisel to the line. Working from the top down to the center. Go down like that. Then we'll come in like this. Working from the top all the way down to that center mark, watching the grain. There we have it. We'll just take that last little bit off, just like that. That's it. Now the main difference here is that this is a tighter radius curve. So it might be difficult to spoke shave this, especially if it's too tight. But what we can do is we can work up here at the top. Now I'm going to work down here, smooth this out. We got a little bit of a flat there, try to take that off. And then we'll come in this way. You'll also notice too what I'm doing is I'm coming back, pulling this back a little bit, smoothing that arch out a little bit more. I don't want to come back here in the tenon area, but I can pull this line back a little bit. One of the things that'll happen sometimes is the spoke shave will want to chatter and jump a little bit, especially with a harder wood. The harder the wood, the more resistance there is against the tool. So there's a couple things you can do. One is make sure the blade is sharp, but you can skew the spoke shave like this. So you actually take the spoke shave and skew it, and you notice how I'm skewing it like this and then turning it as we work it in to the cut. So we're starting like this and then we're skewing it like this. And as we get towards the end, we lift up the back of the spoke shave and keep the front engaged. Last but not least, I'm just going to take and chamfer the edge or round the edge with the spoke shave, working from the top down to the center. So we're working from the top down to the center. And now we'll do the exact same process on the remaining 3 aprons. I've cut all the arches, even put a little chamfer on the edge of the arches, easing the edges, which is helpful. You definitely want to ease these edges because oftentimes if you're going to lift the table, your hand's going to go underneath here. So we've done that, put the arches on, eased the edges, and now we're ready to move on to tapering the legs.